For more information on our top stories and others, please visit our website, it's channelstv.com. YouTube.com/channelsweb has more of our videos and shows. And here are some of the stories that you sent in. We begin with this set of images from the Lekki Peninsula in Lagos State, showing an aerial view of the place. Our eyewitness describes this image as the invasion of squatters. She's raising concerns, though, first of the hazard of living around here and also of the impending safety threats because of the congestion. She wants urgent attention given to this. Still in Lagos is our next set of images from Oregun at Ikeja, the state capital. It is showing this bent electricity pole. Of particular worry to our eyewitness is that this has been like this for a long time. As she can remember, she says, she wants something done to prevent an accident. And finally, this set of images are from Abeokuta, the Ogun State capital. The photos show various intersections of the township road in deplorable state. Our eyewitness is disturbed by the alleged neglect of the roads, which has become a nightmare of sorts, she says. She also wants the state and the federal government to resume work on the roads. We do sincerely thank you for sending in those images. And please know that you too can report events as they happen around you. All you need to do is to go in, download that channel's television's app, free of charge, of course, and then follow the instructions. And there you go. Well, we're now being joined on the news at 10 by Dr. Yele Okeremi, the president of the Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria, as well as the chairman and chief executive officer of Precise Financial Systems Limited, to look at the federal government's plan to achieve a digital economy. I want to thank you so much indeed for coming on the news at 10. President Buhari today directed all MDAs in the country to comply with the ongoing transition of all government operations to digital platforms. Give us your first impression about the president's stance.
Well, it's a good thing, generally speaking, and it's a move that's actually capable of catalyzing Nigeria. But there's a caveat, if properly executed. One of the things I've said in the past is that assume that the only mantra of this government is anti-corruption. Let's assume so. The easiest way to achieve that will be by systematization. And how much better can it be to systematize than to automate and computerize? So on that basis alone, that's extremely good. However, there's a second part of it which is also very, what you call a virtuous piece of it, is that if this is also implemented by Nigerians, it's capable of creating very good wealth while also building capacity. So, I mean, if it is properly done, then, of course, perhaps Nigeria might just be on the right trajectory.
So the president has given these marching orders and the need to transform the economy through this digital means. But how do we achieve this? What are the very first steps, you would say, we need to take to see this process kickstart?
Yes, so, I mean, just like you said, so in the first direction is, okay, let's even use government as the springboard to get things done. So things that I'm expecting to happen is we've been talking about the software policy for so many years. And some of the things I'm expecting to see in the software policy will be things that guarantee that Nigerians are able to tool up to effectively provide solutions to challenges of Nigeria, first of all. And then next, after we're able to do that, and that's a whole lot. If we're able to do that successfully, you and I know that if you are able to implement any good system in Nigeria, it will work anywhere in Africa. Perhaps it will work pretty much in very many countries in the world. That's how smart nations organize themselves. So when you unpack that, my first idea is how do we ensure that we internalize wealth? Because there's another way to do this. We could do it the same way we played in the oil and gas sector, where Nigeria produces so much oil and gas. Big shame we don't have any single oil major in the world. We could also have that kind of situation where, okay, fine, government has made this beautiful pronouncement, but all services are provided by foreigners, and no capacity is developed locally. And so Nigeria, again, begins to consume what it could have produced. And that's why I said that it requires careful planning. Now, people might tell you things that are interesting to hear. You begin to hear things like, do Nigerians have capacity? And I'm not going to argue that, because my opinion is that Nigerians actually have capacity. We have Nigerians in Nigeria, we have Nigerians in the diaspora who have capacity. But let's even assume we don't even have all the capacity. We need to have a game plan that guarantees that within the shortest possible time, we internalize as much as possible. Then one other important thing that I keep telling people is that people have not understood how nations are beginning to weaponize intellectual property. Take a look at what happened between China and the United States. All of a sudden, Google says they were revoking the license of the Android from Huawei. That's weaponizing intellectual property. It means that a country can pull the plug off Nigeria remotely if we refuse to internalize what we are doing. So my point here is that whatever we do, we must ensure that whilst we are solving those problems, we are building capacity, we are creating wealth for Nigeria.
Do you think, though, that we have the requisite infrastructure to support it?
I would say we might not have the infrastructure completely, but we have sufficient to kickstart. So you see, because one of the things we need to appreciate about how these things work is that Rome was not built in a day. So if we keep waiting until the day for the perfect moment, it's never going to come. Let's start from what we have. And let's use what we have to solve the challenges that we have as much as we can. Like I told you, we will be able to create sufficient wealth to invest in further infrastructure. And then more importantly, when we talk about infrastructure in itself, infrastructure is not something that cannot be invested in. At a time in Nigeria, Nigerians didn't have telephones. There were only about 400,000 lines in Nigeria. That was infrastructure. But today, we have very many telephone lines in Nigeria. And it's all done by private investors. So a number of times when we talk about investments, we need to understand that not all investments must be done by governments. There are quite a lot of opportunities to create wealth through partnerships with the private sector.
That's a good place to let it rest. Dr. Yele Okeremi, the president of the Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria, ESPON. Many thanks indeed for talking to us here on the News at 10.
Pleasure, Gimba.
Let's go straight to our Abuja studios now, where Mark Ogun Yusuf is standing by to take us through a couple of more stories on the News at 10. Mark.
Hello, Gimba. It's always good to see you, and we welcome our viewers to Abuja. Now, the Court of Appeal sitting in Abuja has dismissed the appeal filed by Mr. Emmanuel Jime and the All Progressives Congress, the APC, challenging the election of Governor Samuel Ortom of the People's Democratic Party for lacking in merit. The judgment, which was a unanimous one, resolved all the issues in contention against the appellant. The court also awarded the cost of 150,000 naira against Mr. Jime. At the hearing in Abuja last week, counsel to Mr. Jime and the All Progressives Congress, Mr. Yusuf Ali, maintained that the election that produced Mr. Ortom as governor did not comply with the provisions of the law. But in their counter-argument, Governor Ortom's counsel argued that the appellants did not in any way cite any section of the Electoral Act or the 1999 Constitution that was breached during the conduct of the election.
It's a judicial affirmation and confirmation of the electoral victory of government.
And we're looking at education now. Vice President Yemi Oshibajo is calling for improved collaboration from civil society and the private sector in funding education in Nigeria. Delivering the keynote address at Nigeria's annual education conference, he highlights the challenges facing the sector, stating that resolving these challenges will lead to eradication of poverty in the country. Our correspondent, Kayla Megwa, reports.
According to the Ministry of Education, the Buhari administration has invested 2.07 trillion naira in the education sector. And according to the Minister of State for Education, that money has gone into several programs aimed at improving the standard of education in Nigeria in areas of infrastructure development and teacher training.
The national minimum qualification for teaching at the basic and secondary levels is the National Certificate of Education, NCE. Let me emphatically state that by 31st December 2019, any teacher who does not possess the minimum teaching qualification will have no business in our classrooms.
Can the standard of education in Nigeria translate to sustainable livelihoods for its people? The partners in the sector highlight some of the hurdles that must be climbed to achieve this.
Go to school to learn what? Are our curriculum content relevant? Do our curriculum respond to learning needs? Are learning conditions appropriate for successful learnings? These are kind of questions that call for our collective effort.
School enrollments in Nigeria have increased by 40% thanks to the federal government's school feeding program. But the infrastructure to handle this increase is lacking, which is why, among other reasons, Nigeria's vice president is calling for more financial collaborations.
There's a logical link between education and poverty. And I really hope that in the next few years, and by the time we come back for another education conference, that we're seeing greater participation of Nigerian civil society and the Nigerian private sector in the educational sector, especially funding.
Conferences such as this one, which happen every year, are supposed to come up with programs which the government will be able to use to ensure that education is better in the country. Hopefully more policies come up which will ensure that students in Nigeria are up to the standard of their counterparts across the world. Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.